The promise is always the same. We are going to fix the economy. And for a moment, you believe him. You think the machine is about to change direction. But then the confetti gets swept up, the new leader sits in the chair, and the graph does this. It doesn't dip, it doesn't pause, it doesn't care who won. The line tracking wealth inequality ignores them completely. We are taught that democracy is a steering wheel, that if enough of us grab it and turn left, the car goes left. But for 40 years, we've been yanking the wheel and the car keeps driving straight into the ditch. Most people think the driver is lying, but it's much scarier than that. The driver is turning the wheel. The tires just aren't connected to the road anymore. To understand why governments don't fix inequality, you have to stop listening to the speeches and start looking at the wiring under the dashboard. Because the operating system of our economy has a safety mechanism installed, one designed to cut the connection the moment you try to change the destination. Let's trace the wires. Here's the first problem with fixing inequality through elections. The math looks straightforward. There are far more nurses, teachers, and warehouse workers than billionaires. If voting followed money, the many would crush the few every time. But here's what the math misses. Concentrated interests face tiny costs per person and massive gains per person. Imagine a tax break worth $10 billion total. Split among 1,000 people, that's $10 million each. Split among 100 million people, that's $100 each. The first group will fight like hell. The second group won't even know the policy exists. And researchers have documented exactly this. Political scientists Martin Gilens and Benjamin Page studied thousands of policy decisions over decades. Their finding? Economic elites and business interests get what they want. The preferences of the bottom 90% of income earners have almost no effect on which policies actually pass. That's not an opinion, that's data. So the first force keeping inequality alive is simple. The rules of democracy work great for masses of people with vague, diffuse interests, and terribly when a small, focused minority has a lot on the line. Over time, that acts like a one-way ratchet. Tiny advantages get locked in for the best organized players, one clause at a time. But there's a second force that's just as important, and it lives inside the people we actually elect. Because even when voters send politicians to fix the system, those politicians are living on a much shorter clock than inequality is. Their careers, their budgets, their re-election prospects are all measured in election cycles and news cycles, not in decades. That's where we need to go next. Why politicians face short time horizons and immediate costs, even when the problems they're asked to solve are built to play out slowly.
They didn't have to be better than you in order to get the job. And I know you really want to think that like all you have to do is be better. All you have to do is, work harder and, be smarter, and then you'll have what they have. But baby, that's not how they got it.
Even when voters manage to win the argument, there's a second problem hiding inside the people casting the votes. Politicians live on a much shorter clock than inequality does. Their careers are measured in 2-year and 4-year cycles. Their risks are counted in this quarter's headlines and the next election night, not in what happens to the wealth gap in 2045. The trade-off is brutal. Any serious attempt to narrow inequality usually means rising revenue, shifting subsidies, or closing loopholes. The costs show up immediately. Higher visible taxes for someone, louder complaints from organized groups, attack ads about hurting business or ballooning the deficit. The benefits are slow, quiet, and hard to pin on any one decision maker. You can see it in the 2021 expansion of the child tax credit. On paper, it was simple: monthly cash to families with kids. In reality, it was one of the clearest examples in recent history of policy working exactly as advertised. And then, it vanished.
The IRS has unveiled a new tool that will help more than 36 million Americans receive their 2021 child tax credits. The portal will allow eligible families who don't normally file tax returns to sign up in advance for the payments. Starting July 15th, Americans with children under 6 years old will receive a monthly payment of $300.
Not because the data turned against it, but because the timing did. The budget impact was immediate and easy to attack. The long-run payoff, healthier, better educated adults decades from now, wouldn't arrive until long after the votes have been counted and the credit for success could be claimed by someone else. So programs with upfront pain and delayed gains keep getting killed, even when they work. The operating system of politics rewards what can be seen before the next election, not what quietly compounds over a generation. And that bias becomes even more powerful once you remember something else. If a policy makes wealthy investors nervous, their money doesn't have to wait. It can cross a border in milliseconds, long before any long-term reform has a chance to prove itself. If you want to see what happens when a government picks a fight with mobile wealth, look at France. For 35 years, France ran a national wealth tax, the ISF. On paper, it did exactly what people say they want: tax large fortunes every year, not just income. In practice, the wealthy did something else. They left. By 2016, an estimated 10,000 high net worth households had moved their tax residence abroad. Roughly 35 billion euros in assets went with them. Newspapers called it l'exil fiscal, tax exile. After decades of debate, France scrapped the wealth tax in 2017 and replaced it with a softer levy focused mostly on real estate. On the surface, that looks like politics. Underneath, it's physics. Once money can move at the click of a mouse, every serious attempt to tax large fortunes comes with an implied threat. Push too hard, and the base you're trying to tax simply vanishes. Not in theory, in customs lines, in wire transfers, in new shell companies with new mailing addresses. That threat only exists because the plumbing changed. In the mid-20th century, capital controls and fixed exchange rates kept most savings and investments anchored inside national borders. Governments could run top income tax rates above 70, even 90%, without worrying that trillions would sprint offshore overnight. Capital was slow, policy could move faster. Starting in the 1970s, that order collapsed. Capital controls were dismantled, currencies floated, global finance deregulated. Technology did the rest. Money turned into code, able to bounce from New York to London to a Caribbean island in seconds. So, tax policy learned a new hierarchy. Mobile capital gets courted, immobile labor gets tapped. A nurse can't move her job to Singapore between elections. A small shop can't reincorporate in Luxembourg. But a fund, a holding company, a billionaire's family office can. And over time, tax systems quietly adjusted to that fact, which is how we end up with a strange pattern. Even when voters want more equal rules, the detailed code that actually gets written keeps bending toward what capital will tolerate. And once those details are in place, exemptions, special rates, quiet carve-outs, something else happens. The real fight over inequality stops happening in elections and starts happening deep inside institutions that most people never see. Tax authorities, trade negotiators, and central banks. That's where we're heading next, into the tax codes and institutional wiring that lock this tilt in, long after the public thinks the argument is over. Once capital proved it could leave, the tax code stopped being a tool for revenue and started becoming a fortress for retention. In the US, the fortress was built out of nearly 70,000 pages of tax law. Most people think this complexity is just bureaucratic incompetence. It isn't. Every deduction, every exemption, every loophole in those pages has a constituency, a specific industry of donor class that will fight to the death to keep it. This creates a phenomenon political scientists call policy lock-in. Take the top marginal tax rate. In 1980, it was 70%. By 1988, after the Reagan tax cuts, it plummeted to 28%. Politics has swung back and forth for 40 years since then. Democrats have held the White House for decades, and yet the rate has never come close to 70% again. It moved to 39.6%, then down to 35%, then back to 37%. The baseline shifted. The Overton window of what is politically possible moved permanently in favor of capital. But the most powerful lock-in isn't the rate, it's the structure. Since 1921, the U.S. has taxed income from wealth, capital gains, at a lower rate than income from work. That is a century of financial architecture built on a single premise. Entire industries, real estate, private equity, venture capital, are engineered around that gap. Trying to close it doesn't just mean raising a number. It means threatening the business model of the most powerful sectors in the economy. And because the system is so complex, wealthy elites have a massive advantage. They can afford the architects. While the average worker navigates the tax code with TurboTax, the wealthy navigate it with armies of lawyers who know where the secret doors are.
We have to fix the pandemic so that we can fix the economy. The gap between rich and poor in this country is wide, and it's getting wider.
So when politicians say they want to fix inequality, they rarely propose tearing this fortress down. It's too heavy, too guarded, and too risky. Instead, they reach for a different toolkit, one that lets them look like they're doing something without actually changing how the machine works. If you're a politician, you have two ways to solve an economic problem. Option A is structural reform. You rewrite the rules, you break up a monopoly, ban a specific financial product, or force a massive change in how labor is taxed. The problem with option A is that the benefits are vague and years away, but the pain is immediate and specific. If you try to remove a tax loophole for private equity, the private equity industry knows exactly how much money they'll lose. They will spend millions today to kill your career tomorrow. This is what political scientists call concentrated costs. The people you hurt know exactly who you are, and they have the budget to fight back. So politicians choose option B, the patch. Instead of forcing companies to pay living wages, you create a tax credit to top up low incomes. Instead of banning a polluting industry, you offer a subsidy for a green one. You get to cut a ribbon at a press conference. The industry gets to keep its business model. And the cost? It's spread out over millions of taxpayers who each pay a few extra pennies and never notice. This is why we see endless programs and initiatives, but almost no structural change. The system is wired to add layers, never to subtract them. But layers don't fix a broken foundation. They just mask the cracks. Eventually, this creates a gridlock. The elected government becomes paralyzed, terrified of offending any concentrated interest group, capable of only small, cosmetic tweaks. This leaves us with a haunting question. Is this paralysis inevitable? Is every modern democracy doomed to be strangled by lobbyists and complex tax codes? Not exactly. To see the alternative, we have to look at the countries that stopped trying to fix the market and decided to bypass it entirely. When Americans talk about inequality, we usually obsess over redistribution. We assume the only way to fix the gap is to let the market run wild, identify the winners, tax them, and mail checks to the losers. That is the Anglo-Saxon model. And as we've seen, it fails because capital is mobile. It runs away before you can tax it, and the tax code is a fortress that lobbyists control. But there is another architecture. In the Nordic social democracies, the goal isn't just to tax the rich, it's to decommodify the basics of life. This is a critical distinction in system design. In the US, survival is a market product. You buy healthcare, you buy childcare, you buy higher education. If the market price for those things go up, you need more cash just to stay alive. This makes income inequality purely existential. In a universal services model, those sectors are taken off the board. They aren't products you buy, they are rights you access. This changes the physics of wealth. If you don't have to pay $20,000 a year for childcare or $12,000 for health insurance, the fact that your boss takes a larger share of the profits stings, but it doesn't destroy you. The floor of your life is built out of concrete, not cash. But the real genius of this architecture is political. In the US, we use means testing. We create programs only for the poor. This creates a political trap. The poor are stigmatized, and the middle class resents paying for services they don't get. It divides the electorate. Universal systems do the opposite. Everyone pays, but everyone benefits. The doctor and the janitor send their kids to the same free school. This creates policy lock-in in the other direction. It is politically suicidal to cut a program that 90% of the population relies on. So while the US builds a fortress of tax complexity and protects the rich, these systems build a fortress of universal services that protects the rest. But even this system has an Achilles heel. Because no matter how strong your safety net is, it still has to be paid for by an economy that is becoming harder and harder to control. So, after looking at the fortress, the lobbyists, and the bypass, where does this leave you? It leaves you with two distinct tasks. One is political, the other is personal. Politically, we have to stop being naive about how changes happen. We know now that diffuse interests, like voters, lose to concentrated interests, like industries. That means the only way to beat a concentrated interest is to build one of your own. The movements that actually rewrote the operating system, labor in the 1930s, civil rights in the 60s, didn't just vote every 4 years. They built institutions that camped out inside the fortress. They showed up with their own lawyers, their own lobbyists, and their own draft legislation year after year until the cost of ignoring the problem became higher than the cost of fixing the problem. You also have to survive today. And the lesson of this investigation is harsh but clear. The system rewards ownership and penalizes labor. It protects capital with complexity, while it exposes wages to the raw force of the market. So while we push for a better architecture, you have to learn to navigate the one we have. That means moving as much of your life as possible from the labor column to the capital column. It means using the tax-advantaged accounts the system quietly protects. It means building your own fortress, however small, so you aren't completely exposed when the next crisis hits. Using the rules isn't hypocrisy, it's survival. I want to know where you stand on this. If you were the architect and you could rewrite exactly one line of code in the global economy, one tax law, one trade rule, one incentive, what would it be? Put your amendment in the comments below. I read all of them, and they help me decide where to point the lens next. Class dismissed.